All right, welcome to the second half of our review lesson. In the first part, we went through the Google Slides, where you had to find match equations, come up with a graph for a scenario, and then come up with different graphs of lines given their equations. Part B, we went to Desmos and answered a couple of questions about making recommendations and also matching equations with lines in that one as well. Okay, and so that was part B. Part C, we said you could do on graspable math, where you would go and there was a couple of things we did with it. We solved some algebra. We did some slope and y-intercept, y equals mx plus b. We determined x and y-intercepts, and then we did, I got an equation from a point and a slope. So all of those in the graspable math, if you wanted to do by hand, you could, but you could also do in graspable math. So that brings us down to part D, and part D you're going to need to do, have to write out these answers. If you'd like, you can print off this sheet and write your answers right in the space below, or you can just go off and write your answers on a separate piece of paper. It's not necessary to print it off. It's also not necessary when you go off and answer these questions to rewrite the question. Okay, just go off and put number 12 and then start writing your answer. Okay, same with these. Number 11, you just need to write down whether parallel, perpendicular, and either. You don't need to write down the question. Okay, so we're going to review 11, 12, and 13 and 14 in this part of our review video. So for number 11, I actually have these in our notebook file here, so I'm going to move on to here. So are the lines given with the given slopes parallel, perpendicular, or neither? So let's look at the first pair. You see m equals negative 0.5 and m2 equals negative 1/2. Now at first glance they don't look exactly the same, but if you stop and think for a moment, 1/2 is the same as 0.5, 0.5 is the same as 1/2. They are both negative, which means these are actually equal, they're identical. And because the slopes are the same, then we can say that the lines are parallel. Let's look in B. B is 1/4 and so that's M3. M4 is negative 4. So they're not the same, so they're not parallel. The question is, are they perpendicular? Well, in order to be perpendicular, they must be negative reciprocals, which means you must take the reciprocal of one and see if the other one is the positive or negative version of that. So in this case, 1/4, the reciprocal is 4/1. And 4/1 is the same as 4. So that's good. And now this one is positive and the other one is negative, which means they are, in order to be parallel or perpendicular, one has to be positive and the other has to be negative. So this is negative reciprocal. So indeed, these are perpendicular. And then the third one, M5 is 2/3 and M6 is 3/2. So they're not the same, obviously, so they're not parallel. They do look like reciprocals, though. 2/3, if you flip it, becomes 3/2. But this one is positive and so is this one. So these are two different positive slopes, so they will not be perpendicular. In order to be perpendicular, they not only have to be reciprocals, but they also, one has to be negative, one has to be positive. And these are not. So they are neither parallel nor perpendicular. All right, let's move on to number 12. So 12 is one of my favorite questions in that it gets us to practice slope. And we know that when we practice slope, we need to write equations down. So it says, determine the line passing through the given points are parallel, perpendicular, and either. So I've given you 4 points, and we have to imagine the slope of the lines that are connecting these. So in the first one, I'm asked to compare AB and BC, so let's find them separately. So AB, remember, anytime we write down the slope, we're going to ask you that you write down the equation, so the formula. So remember, it's y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So again, we're going to do y2, which is 3. So it becomes 3 minus, and then what is y2? Well, y is the second coordinate in the the second part of the first coordinate is y1. So that's 3 minus 7. And then the x is the x component. So there's the 9 minus 1. So 9 minus 1. All right, so I've done that successfully. Now let's be careful when we subtract them. 3 minus 7. So 3 is kind of warm. And then when we subtract 7, gets us down into the cold. And we end up at negative 4. And then 9 minus 8, that's just simply 9 minus 8. Or sorry, 9 minus 1 is 8. All right, now we've got a fraction, and we do know that our slope is negative 4 over 8. But anytime we can reduce, we should reduce it. So we're looking for numbers that divide evenly into 4 and 8, or negative 4 and 8. And I think 4 goes into both of them. So negative 4 divided by 4 is 1, and 8 divided by 4 is 2. And so this slope reduces down to negative 1/2. All right, so that is the slope of the line AB. Next, we're asked to compare it to BC. So this time we're going to look at, again, we'll write down the equation, but this time we're doing these two, B and C. So this time the C is the second coordinate and B is the first. So let's be careful, and again, we'll write this out. So this becomes the Y coordinate. Y2 is this one, negative 1 minus 3. So negative 1 minus 3. And then the X is 7 minus 9. So 7 minus 9. All right, we'll carefully do this. So negative 1 minus 3. So negative 1 is already cold, and you are going minus 3. That means you get colder, and you are at negative 4. Okay, and then 7 is warm, but when you subtract 9, you actually dip into the negatives, and you get negative 2. Again, this is correct slope, but we need to reduce that. So first thing I notice, it's a negative divided by a negative, which will end up being positive, and 4 over 2 ends up being reduces to 2 over 1. Divide the top and the bottom by 2. But there's this negative over negative, so a negative divided by a negative is positive, and you could simply just say that the slope is positive 2. Now we need to compare AB with BC. So the slope of AB ended up being negative 1 over 2, and the slope of BC is 2 over 1. So they're not parallel because they're not the same. However, this one is the reciprocal. So 1 over 2, the reciprocal is 2 over 1. And this one is negative and this one is positive. So that is the negative reciprocal, which means that AB is perpendicular to BC. So we can write the symbol perpendicular as like an upside down T. AB is perpendicular to BC. So there's our answer to A. And now let's check out B. B asks us to compare AB. Well, that's good. I already have AB done. I don't need to redo it. And CD. So CD is the last two. So this is new. So again, we'll write down our formula, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And let's divide. So again, this now is y2 and y1. So be careful on this one. This is 3. Subtract, and then what is y1? Well, y1 is the y-coordinate of this C value or C point. So that's negative 1. So it's y minus negative 1. Okay, so we'll have to deal with that in a moment. Let's continue on, though, and do the x's. So the x is negative 1 minus, and what's the x coordinate for this? 7. Okay, so let's go and simplify this. So again, here's the careful part. 3 minus minus 1. So even just by saying minus minus doesn't sound right. A negative and a negative makes a positive. So this is the same as 3 plus 1. The other way you can imagine it is, remember, 3 subtract negative. Subtract negative is subtracting cold. And subtracting cold makes you warmer. And so it's like 3 plus 1, which is 4. And then this is negative 1, however, and it is subtract 7. So you're just getting further in the colds. So you get all the way down to negative 8. So 4 over negative 8 looks an awful lot like this, 4 over 8. That reduces to 1 over 2. And that negative can either stay on the bottom, or it can go out front, or it can even go on the top. It doesn't matter. Okay, so it's negative 1/2. So the slope of CD is negative 1/2. The slope of AB, remember we're comparing it to AB, is also negative 1/2, which means since they're the same, AB is parallel to CD. Okay, so there is number 12. And this you'll be writing out on a piece of paper with all of your proper form, working down, writing the equation every time. I'll be looking for this to give you full marks. All right, let's move on to 13. So 13 is going to continue talking about parallel and perpendicular as clues to find equations of lines. So in the first few, we should be okay, just be able to see it. It says determine the equation of line with the given clues. Express the form in y equals mx plus b. So here the slope is 2 and the y-intercept is negative 8. So right away we know that it's y equals Now, the 2 goes in front of the x, so it's 2x. Don't forget about the x, so 2x. And then it's plus -8. But of course, we're not going to write down plus -8. If it's plus -8, it's just the same as subtract 8, -8. Okay, we're not going to write down plus negative. You can't have the two operations right next to each other. A positive and a negative just gets you a negative anyway, so it's just going to be -8. So a slope of 2 and a y-intercept of -8. B, slope is -3, y-intercept is 5. So that should be pretty straightforward. -3 means -3x, and this one is a y-intercept of 5, so it's just plus 5. The slope in the next one is 0, and the y-intercept is 4. So you might think of it as this. You might think y equals 0x and then plus 4. But 0 times anything, even x, is just 0. So that actually disappears. So most of you will probably just write y equals 4. Okay, and remember that slope is 0 is a horizontal line anyway, so it's just y equals 4. All right, now we get into D and E, where there's a little bit more clues and a little bit of more fiddling we have to do before we can get the equation. So the clue is that the line is parallel to this one. Okay, so we have to get the clue from this equation. So it's parallel to this, which means I'm interested in the slope. What's the slope of this equation? Well, right there, the slope is 1/4. Remember the equation, the coefficient on the x is your slope. So our line is parallel to it. So ours is a parallel slope. Well, if this is 1/4, ours is also 1/4. Remember, parallel slopes have this, or parallel lines have the same slopes. And then the second part of the clue, well, that's not very exciting. It just tells you that b is 7. And so now you finish off just like you did up here. The equation is 1/4 is the slope, and the b is 7. So it's just y equals 1/4 x plus 7. And lastly, perpendicular to this line and has the same y-intercept as that. So if it's perpendicular, again, we're interested in the slope. The slope of this guy is the coefficient on x is -3. Ours is perpendicular though. It's not parallel. This one was parallel. This one is perpendicular, which means we have to do the negative reciprocal. So the first thing I'm noticing is that this is negative. That means my slope is going to be positive. And 3 is a fraction, although it doesn't look like 1. It's 3/1. And the reciprocal of 3/1 is 1/3. And that one is negative. This is positive. So our slope is 1/3. Next, our next clue is it has the same y-intercept as this. So y equals -7x plus 9. I am only interested in the y-intercept of that. So I'm only interested in that part, not the slope. It just says it's the same y-intercept as this. So the b part is 9. And so I got my slope from this clue and my y-intercept from this clue. I now have 1/3 is my slope, my b is 9, and so my equation is 1/3 x plus 9. Okay, all right, so there's 13. And then the last question in our review will also be the last question of your culminating activity. And you will recall that this last question is by far my favorite because it involves so much of the work from the whole year. All right, so we're going to have to do slope and linear relationships and equations and y equals mx plus b and algebra and everything. So let's read the instructions. It says find the slope and y-intercept using algebra and state the equation. Then use the equation to answer the other questions below. So the other questions will pop up in a second. I have them written out if we go back to our thing here. So there is the spot for you to figure out the equation, and then you'll answer these questions below. All right. So what's given to us here is 2 bits of information about this kitty kennels, which charges $65 for boarding a cat for 5 days, and 14 days costs $128. So you might go off and try and guess some math here, but remember, it appears that there's probably a flat rate and a rate of change. So we need to figure out the slope and the y-intercept. We are given neither of those in this question. What we are given is 2 points. And remember, the points are given to us. We need to write them down as the time as the independent variable, the first one, and money as the second one. So almost all of these are going to be written like that. And we have two bits of information, the time and the money. In this case, the time is measured in days and the cost is in money. So right here you see 14 days is 128. So that's in the order which we want. The X value is 14 and the Y value is 128. The second one, the information is given to us backwards. It gives us the cost first and the number of days second. But that doesn't mean we write it differently. Our coordinates are always time first and money second. The independent first, which is 5 days, and the cost for those 5 days is 65, so it goes second. So make sure you're careful about writing these in the proper order. All right, we need to figure out the the slope first. We need the slope. So slope, we know we're going to write down y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And we'll use these coordinates. It is the change in the cost over the change in the days. So delta y over delta x, or y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So 128 subtract 65 is the top. That's the change in the y's, the change in the money, over the how many days did it change. So we had 14 days versus 5 days, so 14 minus 5. We can go to our calculator here then and say that 128 minus 65 is 63, and 14 minus 5 is 9. 63 divided by 9 is 7, and we figured out that it is 7 is our slope. That means it is $7 per day to board the cat. But there must be some registration fee or initial value or flat rate, and so that's what we have to figure out next. All we have so far is the 7, so we know the equation is y equals 7x plus something, some flat rate. So what do we do now? Well, we're going to take one of these coordinates, either one, I've chosen 5 and 65 just so the numbers are smaller, and substitute it into the equation. The y value is the second number, so 65 is my cost. For how many days? The x value is 5. Now we're going to use our algebra that we've been practicing all year. 7 times 5 is 35. Okay, so that just gets 7 times 5 is 35. Subtract 35 from both sides because we need b by itself. And 65 minus 35 is, of course, 30. So it turns out there's this flat rate of $30. And then after that, it is $7 per day, which means our equation is y equals 7x plus 30. So we've answered the first part of this. We found the slope and the y-intercept and stated the equation. Don't forget to state the equation. And we can test this. Let's test it on an easy number here. Let's test it on 5 days. So if it's $7 a day, 7 times 5 is 35. Plus your $30 sign up fee is $65. So that is correct. All right. Now, with the second part is use the equation to answer the questions below. So again, if we look here, we found our equation, but now it says find the cost for 4 days. And then a separate question, if the cost was 114, how many days did the cat stay at the kennel? So the first one is 4 days, which means x equals 4 because x represents the number of days. So our equation is y equals 7x plus 30. So, but I've replaced the x with 4, so it's 7 times 4 plus 30. 7 times 4 is 28, plus your $30 makes 58. And remember, the question didn't actually say, find me y, it said, how much money? So we have to, since the question was given to us in English, we have to answer with a very brief English statement. The cost is $58. All right, and what was the second one? Let's go back here. If the cost was 114, how many days was it? So that means we've got 114. This time is the y value. That's the cost is given to us. So we're going to replace the y. So it's 114 equals 7x plus 30. And we need to solve for 30. We have to do the opposite operation to get rid of this 30. So it's negative 30 from both sides. 114 minus 30 is 84, and I'm left with 7x over here. 7 times x means I got to divide both sides by 7. And 84 divided by 7 ends up being 12. So it's exactly 12 days that the cat was at the kennel because the cost was $114. All right, so we now have all of the review done. And now you're going to take your phone is your best scanner. Again, if you have other ways you can do it, use your scanner feature. Remember, as you're scanning, if you scan a page, you can go off and scan the next page and the next page before you push save, and then it'll group it all together instead of how you having to hand in like 4 or 5 different files. Okay, so you're going to take your pieces of paper, scan it, put it all together, and then you'll come back to the assignment, and your assignment will have a turn in button up at the top. Remember, you're going to click on turn in and you're going to choose the file. So you'll choose the file with all of the scanning that you did of all the stuff that you wrote on paper, and you will also include the link for the graspable math in case you did that. Remember, so you're going to go to share, link, and copy, and you would also share that in your thing. So you'd actually be handing back 2 parts. The Desmos activity I will be able to see as long as you submit it, or as long as you're doing stuff, I will be able to see that when you sign in. And your group part A part, the Google Slides part, will automatically be in the hand in folder. So you're actually going to only be handed in 3 things. Your part A Google Slide will already be there. Your Desmos, you don't need to worry about handing in, it'll automatically be there. The link to the graspable math, if you are doing that part, but if you're doing it on paper, that's fine. And then your part D, where you actually have the stuff you've written on paper, you'll scan and include that file. So there's lots of stuff for you to hand in. The review lesson that you're doing right now, you don't actually have to hand any of them in. You can if you want. This is just practice for you, okay? So it's totally up to you if you hand this in. I think I will give you the option only so you can practice, but you don't have to hand in all of these. I've obviously gone through and answered all the questions for you, so there's no sense you handing it in. But I want you to get a sense of what your actual culminating activity will look like, so you'll be able to see everything you want. So if you'd like to hand stuff in, you can, but you don't need to hand in all of the work. I already know all the answers to this because we just did it. Okay, so that is our review of our culminating activity. It will take you, a bit of time to get through all of the stuff. You can tell by the 2 long videos that we did here, but you do have 6 hours to complete it. So I have full faith that you'll be able to do that. And I'm really looking forward for you to wrapping up this unit and wrapping up this course. So best of luck with your review. Remember, you can come see me on Wednesday in our Google Meet to ask me any questions or any of that before you get on there. And remember, don't forget to sign up for a time for you to do your Google Meet. All right, best of luck with this review, and I look forward to you doing well on your culminated activity. Take care.